recorded, and I
Now
didn't
it
get
says
that.
recording.
Now it's recording.
Okay, I'm still not seeing that, but I'm gonna trust you all.
Yeah, mine now does say recording too.
Okay, good sign.
I'm not sure if I'm the one recording it, but someone is.
Oh gosh, I have gotten trapped in this window from Zoom. That's fun. Okay. Oh, I can open the chat. Okay, that's a great side effect. Okay, cool. Okay, now that we're recording, right? So this is just going to be the quick walkthrough of the standard commands you're going to use the most often when you're working with Git. So right now I'm cloning the empirical repository. I'm just going to call it empirical example, just so that it doesn't conflict with the one I already have. So this is going to pull everything from empirical. It's going to be great. I can now change directory into empirical example. And sure enough, all of the things that we expect to have in empirical are here. So now, hypothetically, let's see. So yeah, if there had been any changes to empirical since I was last doing anything, I could do git pull to get them down. Since there haven't been, I can't. But just to make an example of a commit, I'm going to go ahead and edit the README. So let's say I want to just make a change to the README where I add some additional change here. Like maybe I want to say, instead of web tools, I want to say web tools and research projects, just as an elaboration. So if I do that, I've now made a change. Oh yeah, so I reflexively typed git status when this first downloaded, just because I'm in the habit of that. You'll notice it told me that I am on branch master and it is up to date with origin master, which means there are no commits that I have made here that I haven't pushed, or commits made on the GitHub version of empirical that I haven't pulled that it's aware of. And there's nothing to commit working tree clean, which means I haven't made any changes to anything. Now that I've made a change, if I do git status, it's going to say there is a change I've made that is not currently staged for commit. So it's like not on that stage that I'm about to like save as a new incremental commit. And that file is README and I've modified it. So if I say, okay, yeah, that's an important change, I want to keep it, the way to save it is to say git add README. If I do git status now, it will say, okay, once I commit, the things that are going to get saved in their current state are README and nothing else. Notice it gives a hint here. If I decide actually I don't want to save README, I can use this command to get rid of it and get it out of this changes to be committed section. But in this case, I do want to save it. So I'm going to say git commit. And whenever I use git commit, I use the command line flag -m to leave a message about what happened in this commit. If you don't use -m, it will dump you into a text editor, which depending on what your default text editor is and what text editor you're used to may or may not be deeply confusing. So I like to just avoid that with the -m flag. And here I'm going to just say added clarification about gallery. Usually you would have written a little bit more code in a commit, so like you could have a more useful message than this. In general, you want to keep your commit messages short and descriptive of the high level like goal of the change you made. So if I do that, it will say, okay, I made a commit. In that commit, I changed one file by adding one line and deleting one line. When you modify a line, it shows up as both adding and deleting a line because it sees you deleting the old line and adding a new one. And if I do git status now, it will say again, everything is clean, I'm in commit, all my changes are saved. This is great. This is like the state I ideally would always leave my repo in at the end of the day. In practice, none of us are perfect. I don't always quite achieve that, but that is like a good thing to strive for. So you'll notice that now it says my branch is ahead of origin master by one commit. So origin is the name of the copy of this repository on GitHub. and then master is the main branch of it. If this were a different repository and I wanted to just send this change up to master, I would use the command git push. In this case, I'm not going to do that because empirical is not a simple repository. It is one that a bunch of people are collaborating on and depending on the code end. So we try to keep the master branch pretty clean and avoid ever committing code directly to it. I'm going to talk in a moment about kind of the process we follow for adding code to master. But the takeaway for right now is do not ever push changes directly to the master branch of empirical because we want to run them through a bit of vetting first to make sure that we don't accidentally break stuff.
That being said, you're not going to destroy empirical if you do accidentally push things directly to the master.
Yes. Good point. Yeah. So the great thing about Git is you can always very easily revert changes and go back. So it's very hard to permanently break anything. There are some ways to do it, but as long as you never use the -f flag, there is very little permanent damage you can do. Okay. Any questions about that? Just like capsule summary of like using Git on your computer.
I was thinking it might be helpful because I think a lot of people have Vim or VI set as their default for Git, and it might be helpful for those who have never used Vim maybe to go over how to input and quit and write and all that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Not intuitive. I don't know. I don't know if other people don't know how to use it either. Maybe everybody knows how to use Vim.
No, there's really no reason that everybody would know how to use Vim.
For example, I don't. I use Emacs for everything. I know how to escape from Vim, and that's about it.
Yeah, I know survival level Vim, as in I know what to do if I get dumped into Vim.
Yeah, me too, but I feel like it often dumps people into Vim. I don't know.
It does, yeah. So that's exactly what happens if you don't use that -m flag. So yeah, let's just demo that so that it is not scary when it happens to you. So I'm just gonna open up README again and make a very trivial change. Like I'm just gonna add some spaces here just so that I've got an example. So yeah, what would happen if I did git commit and I didn't have this -m flag? Oh, sorry. I would have to add README first before that would happen. Otherwise, it's just saying, what do you want me to save? Oh, whoops. I changed my default editor because I didn't want to get dumped into Vim. This is
Yeah, that's not even
Nano's
Vim.
a great option. Okay, so never mind. Let's just do an example in Vim. So if I wanted to open README in Vim, sorry, I don't have Vim installed because I really don't want to get dumped into it. Okay, so just
one of the things we can do is if we want to just create a repository and have everyone do something little in it, like we were talking about having everyone say something about their research interests. I forget what we were saying last time we were going to do. That'll give people a chance to get stuck, and then we can unstick them.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, there's a bit of stuff I want to get to before we do that, but yes. Just like super high level, if you get dumped into Vim, what you should do is hit escape:WQ, enter.
Side note, if anybody wants to learn Vim, hit me up. I love it very much, so.
Yeah, I've also just posted a similar sentiment in the Slack.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, are there more high level questions or should we move on to the GitHub portion of this enrichment session? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the GitHub portion. You can always ask more questions later, and this will give a chance very soon for you to actually try some stuff out, which is always a great way to figure out what questions you have because invariably things will go wrong. And the point is for them to go wrong now while we can help. Of course, we're always available for help. Just send us a message on Slack. Okay, so I'm going to start out by giving just everyone a brief tour of the empirical repo on GitHub, just because there's a lot of nooks and crannies that are very useful to know about. And then we're going to try out actually making some changes using GitHub's interface. Okay, so this is the empirical repo. Most of you have seen this page of it. Most of you are familiar with the clone or download button, et cetera, et cetera. This is the README. So the first thing I want to call your attention to is this issues page. So some of you have probably encountered GitHub issues before, but for those of you who haven't, this is the system that we use basically to keep track of stuff that we know we need to fix about empirical. You can see we have a lot of issues open. There's a lot of stuff that we still want to add, a lot of things that we think can be better. And by keeping track of them here, we know that we won't forget that one day we do need to fix them. And so if ever you're developing something in empirical or MABE or Vita, and you realize that there is like an underlying problem in empirical that you're not going to fix right now, but that somebody should fix one day, what you should do is you should go to this page, you should click New Issue, and you should give it a descriptive title. And then in the body, you should say what's going wrong. Ideally, you should like give an example of like a test case that should do one thing and instead does a different thing, so that it's really clear what the problem is and how we would know if we fixed it. And then once you've written that, you can submit new issue and it will show up on our issue tracker. We also have a variety of labels that you can use to clarify specifically what the topic of the issue is. This is useful later for people finding like all the issues with, you know, the evolution tools or something. Like if someone wants to work on an issue and knows that they have a certain piece of experience, this is a useful way for them to find issues to work on. So try to give most things at least one of these topics. And then usually you'll want to have some goal. Most likely it'll be a bug fix, but it could be an enhancement, or maybe you need help, an answer on something.
And I think it's,
yeah.
sorry.
No,
I
go
think
on.
it's important to stress that don't hesitate to file one of these. If you're confused about something, file an issue, because that means you're having an issue. And we can always remove an issue later. So, you know, if it turns out to be something that you know, that you were just misunderstanding, whatever, this gives us an opportunity to explain to you what's going on, which is great, and then resolve the issue, and that is fine. So if you think, if you are confused about something, if you're trying to do something and it's not working, you should absolutely feel free to file an issue on it. Don't, you know, don't worry about, oh, but I might not have this right or something like that. It is fine. If you're not understanding something, we should probably be explaining it better, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like definitely, like feel free to make issues. Also, if you're having a question, that probably means someone else is going to have the same question in the future. And if you put it into the issue system, even after we close it, like they'll be able to search through that for help. And that's just like a good resource to develop. So yeah, be free with the issue making. Do people have questions about the concept of issues on GitHub? Okay. The other really important thing to be aware of on this repository is this pull requests tab. So in a few minutes, we're going to talk about how to make our own pull requests. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about the concept of pull requests and the pull requests that are already here. So I said before that empirical is, you know, pretty large-scale collaborative software project. So there are a lot of different people working on a lot of different things at a lot of different times. And so the way we keep track of that is via pull requests. So pull request is basically, it's kind of confusingly named. It means it's a request that the main repository pull from some other location. So, you know, on your local repository, you might pull from this GitHub version. A pull request is a request that you pull something from a different location into the main GitHub version. And so you can make a pull request either from a different branch, and I haven't talked about branches yet, I will do that in a moment, or from a different fork, which I will also talk about in a moment. Maybe I should have talked about that before this. But basically the idea is it's a huge chunk of code that you're suggesting we add into empirical. And ideally this should be kind of a single like chunk of work. So for instance, it's a good example in the closed ones. Yeah, so like this is a nice straightforward pull request that Matthew made a couple days ago. So he finished working on this cookie cutter template that you all used in the tutorial. And he realized that it would be really great if in the main empirical repository, there was a pointer to that template so that other people could use it. And so he made this pull request that just contains a few commits, just these 3. And if we want to see exactly what the commits that it contains are, we can click on commits right here, and it will list all 4 of them. We can look at the files that are changed here. You can see it's just a change to the README where he added these few lines about the template and a link to it. And so when he created the pull request, it notified everyone that gets notifications from the empirical repository to come take a look at it. And then a few things happened. So you know how I said that we like to keep the master branch of empirical protected from things going wrong? So as a mechanism for that, we have a few safeguards in place to ensure that we don't accidentally commit broken code to master. So the first of these safeguards is, let's see, where does it list the checks? Is it not? I guess because this doesn't actually have code, it's maybe looking a little different than it would elsewhere. Okay, I'm going to switch over to a different pull request as an example, because I know that this one does have all the checks. So for instance, this is a much larger pull request to reorganize the test suite, just to make it more intuitive to navigate. You can see a lot more work went into this. Oh, I guess it doesn't show the checks after you merge it. That makes sense. Okay, let's go to an open one. I was hoping to not use this one as an example because it's not a good example of what a pull request should be like. A pull request should be a single feature. This is instead a horrible monster of a pull request that I made. However, this has an example of what it will look like when you open a pull request and checks are run. So there are 3 different checks that we'll have to run. The first one is this continuous integration check. So continuous integration is basically a technique where all of the tests that are in your code, so you might have noticed there's a tests directory in empirical that has a ton of tests inside of it. Those are what get run by this continuous integration website, Travis CI, every time we make a commit to empirical. And you don't need to know the specifics of this, but I want you to see it because most of you are going to eventually want to write tests for your code, and you'll want to know what this should look like. And feel free to ask me more questions about this later. When you're actually doing it. This isn't going to be an enrichment about testing, so I'm not going to go into a ton of details. But basically, Travis CI will have one of these pages for every time it runs all of your tests. Every time it does that, it's going to kind of do a bunch of different test jobs to test out different compilers and different subsets of the tests. And if you click on one of these jobs, just as an example, you can see that it's going to have this log where it literally prints out everything that would have been written to your screen if you'd run the tests locally. And so you can scroll through this, and if something went wrong with your tests, you can go to the end and see what the error was. And so you can figure out why your tests aren't working. And that is the crux of that. So if any of these had failed, instead of a check mark here, they would have like a little red X, and you could go click on them to learn more about what went wrong. And you can always ask us for help in figuring out the process there. So that is the first check that has to pass before a pull request can be eligible to be merged. The other one is code coverage. So our tests are only useful if we actually are testing the code that is in the repository, and especially the code that we are committing. So the other thing that has to happen is that the pull request cannot decrease the overall percentage of code that has tests that cover it in empirical. And it also, there needs to be a certain percentage of the files that you touched in the pull request that are covered or have a certain minimum level of coverage. So for instance, here, the tests in this pull request cover 90% of the files that are touched by this pull request, which is greater than the average for the repository, which is 84%. So that's good. And then also this increases the overall code coverage for empirical as a whole. So that is also valid. Just to quickly show you what this looks like. CodeCov is the tool that we use to track our code coverage. It has a very nice UI for looking at what parts of files are covered and what parts aren't. So for instance, here is an example of what looking at a file looks like that will load. Yep, okay. It's got a lot of information to collate, so it takes a second. Yeah, so you can see any line that does not have a test that causes it to run ends up in red here. And any line that does have a test that causes it to run turns up in green. Note that just because a line runs during the test doesn't mean that it's tested well. This doesn't guarantee that there's like an assertion that's confirming that this behaves correctly. Also, like some lines can't be covered by tests. There are a lot of things about code coverage as a metric that are imperfect. However, it is better than nothing as a way of ensuring that we are at least having some tests that are like making sure our code isn't completely broken. And testing is one of those things that is always a work in progress and can always be better. This is just a tool for helping us do better at that. I should also just note while I'm talking about this, a lot of you are going to be working on the web part of empirical. We do not currently have coverage of code that only works in JavaScript. Happy to talk later about the reasons behind that, but turns out that's not a common thing to do or want, so there are not pre-existing tools for it.
But if any of you are feeling particularly crazy and want to get those tools working, that would be awesome.
Yes, 100%. That would be such a useful project for someone to do. Okay, so those are the 3 checks that have to pass before your pull request can get merged in. The other thing that has to happen is someone has to review it. So they have to look through it, look at all the changes you made and say, yes, I don't see any problems with this. This looks like it improves empirical. There aren't like design issues that need to be fixed before this can be merged in, and so on and so forth. And I think anyone who has like write access to the main empirical library is a valid reviewer. So that should be pretty much all of the mentors. So probably in your case, your mentor will review your code. In some rare cases, it might be someone else. Yeah, and so once all that's happened, then someone can click the merge pull request button and your code will all get merged into the master branch, become part of the current state of empirical. Okay, that is pull request in a nutshell. People have questions about that. That was a lot of information. Okay, it's okay if you don't remember all that. I mostly just want you to have a sense of like, oh yeah, testing. I remember that there was this way to look at the code coverage, or oh, I remember that, you know, there's this thing that runs all the tests. That's like, I want you to be familiar with those concepts, and there's obviously going to be a lot of details to learn that will be specific to your project, and we will help you with those. Okay, that was a lot of me talking. Let's get to something hands-on. So I said I want you all to get practice making a pull request. I was originally thinking that I would have you all make like dummy pull requests on the empirical repository, but on Monday, Charles pointed out that a much better option is to have you all make pull requests that you will eventually have to make anyway by starting your blog posts. So as you probably noticed on the schedule, all of you should be planning to eventually write a blog post about what you're working on. It'll be a great way to explain what you did. It'll be a good reference for like sending to people that you're applying for jobs with in the future. It'll be a great reference for anyone that wants to use the feature you wrote. And it'll be a good way for you to crystallize in your head what you're working on. So for all of these reasons, it's a good idea. Those blog posts are gonna live on the Waves website. For those of you who are unaware, the Waves website is also written through a Git repo. So to get there, I think if I just go to my homepage, it will show up. Yeah, okay. So I've contributed to it a lot, so it is on my sidebar. If you cannot find it, I think we have a link somewhere on the Slack.
I'll find it.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the repository that manages the Waves website. In case any of you haven't seen something like this before, this is a website that is written via something called Jekyll. which is basically a technique or an engine that turns Git repos full of READMEs into coherent websites. So GitHub has this very nice tool called GitHub Pages that lets you automatically host the contents of a repo as a website. So here we're doing that by having the Jekyll processor do a bit of work to turn it into a fancy explanatory website. A lot of you will probably also want to use something similar when you're making your applications that demonstrate out the code that you write. So if you look at my repositories, for instance, you'll notice that I have a lot where like I'm just using GitHub Pages to make the .html file in the web directory of my thing that I created with the cookie cutter template be just a web page that you can visit. So that's another totally valid way to use GitHub Pages. Okay, but so for the purposes of today, you're going to want to make blog posts. And so they all live in this blog/posts directory. So currently there's one. It is the onboarding checklist that Matthew wrote. Notice that the way it's named is year, month, date, and then the name or the topic of the post. And if you look in here, so GitHub is doing some stuff to render this nicely. This is written in a language called Markdown, which is just a really simple syntax for like formatting things, making stuff bold. If you want to know what this looks like in non-rendered Markdown, so just like the raw stuff that you would actually type, you can click on this raw button and it will show you. So you can see it's got this little header that's separated off with dashes. This gives some metadata to Jekyll that it uses to render this correctly as a blog post. So you will want to give your posts the same information. So the layout should be posts because they're all going to be blog posts. The title can be whatever you want. It'll probably be the name of your project. The date's going to be kind of whatever you want, really. I mean, we'll be posting all of these, I guess, in August. So you could choose today's date. You could choose some date in August, some date in between. We might amend the date at some point. And then the author, which will be you. So you don't have to write your whole blog post in the pull requests that we're about to make. But you should at least have this header and like maybe like a few sentences about what your project is about. Okay, so that's where you're going to want to put your stuff. Let's talk about how to actually make these pull requests happen. Okay, so before I alluded very briefly to something called forks and something else called branches. So a fork is a copy of a repository on one person's account on GitHub that lives on your account on GitHub. So just like you can have a copy of a Git repo on your local computer and a copy that lives on GitHub servers, you can have two different copies that live on GitHub servers under different people's accounts. And forking is a really useful way to kind of like keep your changes contained until you're ready to merge them back into the main repository. So you should talk to your mentor about how they want you to handle committing to the main repo for whatever project you're working on, whether it's empirical or MABE. But in a lot of cases, you'll want to like make your own fork of empirical. The alternative to that is making a branch with an empirical, which I'll talk about a little more at the end if we have time. In this case, I want you all to make a fork of waves because that's going to be the easiest way to make this contribution. So to do that, you're going to navigate to this waves repository on GitHub and you're going to click fork. I would click it and demonstrate, but I already have a fork of waves, so it will not let me do that. But I want all of you to do that right now. Let's see. Could I get a thumbs up? I think if I click on participants, it will give me a, yeah. So do you all have an interface for, shoot, this used to have like a thumbs up option.
Yeah, it differs per, like, different hosts can turn different things on for Zoom.
I mean, clearly, since some of the participants have thumbs up or have now turned them off, it is possible.
Okay. Let's see.
Could we do like a post in the chat as a substitute or something like that?
We could. It makes it a little hard to like evaluate like what percentage of people have done it.
That's true.
Can everyone raise their hand?
Why don't we just raise hands?
Yeah, okay. So raise your hand when you've made a fork.
So you just have to click fork, correct? Like at the
Yep.
top of the screen. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. I just don't want to leave anyone behind because there'll be more steps after that.
I confess I don't know how to raise my hand.
So on Zoom, you should have a button called Participants. If you click on that, it should open a list of all the participants, and at the bottom there should be some button that says something like raise hand.
Emily, if you click the number next to fork, it should tell you who's forked.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so I also do not have a raise hand option.
My internet cut out.
I don't either. It might be a host co-host thing too.
Oh, interesting. I
Yeah.
don't
Oh, the
think
host can't raise their hand.
Okay.
No, Emily raised her hand.
I'm not a
Who's
host.
not a host?
Oh, it's just me and Austin. And
Did you co-host, Emily? And now your hand is gone. So
Okay, well that's great. Okay, I'm just gonna to watch this list here and watch it grow. Let's see, we've got. Okay. Oh, interesting. Now I'm getting like a notification showing how many people have raised their hands. Yeah, the Zoom interface has all kinds of quirks. Okay, it's a little hard to cross-reference this list against my mental list of all the participants.
If anybody's having particular trouble, just let us know in Slack or in the chat.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to say. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going because I'm not hearing any people having problems. I'm so used to doing this like in a room where like we can all like put sticky notes on our computers and like make it really clear. Oh, okay. I see Raheem is having trouble. What problem are you having?
I don't think the button isn't coming up.
Oh, interesting. So like when you go to the Waves repo, you don't have a fork button here?
Well, I see it, but I can't tap it. Like, it's gray.
Oh.
I wonder if you have to log in.
Oh, yeah. Are you logged in?
Yes, I'm logging to my GitHub.
Huh.
what's your GitHub username, Raheem?
They call me him.
So it shows you already have made a fork. So that could be,
Okay, that would do it.
yeah. Because I know it wasn't letting Emily write if you've already made one.
So I think it would let me click the button, but
It may be that the button thinks it's already been clicked and that something's gone strange on Raheem's end of things.
yeah. So just to
It says I
check.
cannot vote because I'm not a member of any organization.
Yeah,
yeah, that is strange that it's giving you that message. It does look like you have a fork on your account. So I would recommend just going to like your account, like, if you click on your profile page and you say, go to your repositories, and then you should see Waves on that list. At least I do. So hopefully that means you will too. And then you can click on it and get to it that way.
Okay.
So it's given me the same message if I, like after I forked and then I try to click the fork again from my repository, which I forked, it's given me the same weird message, like not a member of any organization or something like that.
Oh, okay. So that is not an intuitive error message, and it should give you a more informative error message. I think the issue it's having there is that you can't fork your own repository, because forking is making a copy of a repo on a different account on your account. And so if you try to make a copy of a repo that's on your account, then GitHub is like, wait, there are 2 copies of this repo. I can't do that.
Yeah, so just for some additional context, if you are a member of some organization, you can fork it to that organization, which is why it says, if you're not, then I don't know what to do. But what it should say is, not a member of any organization. This is your own repo. You cannot fork your own repo.
Yeah, so general thing to like keep in the back of your mind when you're working with any coding tool ever. If an error message doesn't make sense, it is the fault of the person who wrote that error message. Keep that in mind when writing your own error messages and try to make them informative, but also do not beat yourself up if other people wrote bad error messages. Okay, so does everyone now have a fork of the Waves repo on their account on GitHub? Okay, hearing no objections. I wish I could see everyone. Okay, so everyone should go to their fork. So like right now I'm on mine. It's got this little fork symbol that indicates that it's fork, and it has a link back to the main repo that I forked from. And yeah, if you're having any issues, definitely let us know in chat and we will help. So the next step is to make a new branch of your repo. So you could do this by cloning this repo to your computer and making a branch there with git checkout -b. In this case though, we're just editing markdown files, and GitHub actually has like a pretty decent built-in markdown editor. So I think it's going to be easiest if we just keep this all on GitHub. And so GitHub also has an interface for making a new branch. That interface is clicking on this branch button and then typing the name of the branch you want to make. I'm going to call mine Emily Dolson blog post, which is a little disingenuous because I'm not actually writing my own blog post. But I want you all to name your branches something like this, except with your name. And so it's saying, okay, do you want to create that branch? And I do. So I'm going to click this button. And now I have that branch. It says branch created. And now on this drop-down list, I have that as an option. And so if I want to make a change to this branch, I need to make sure that that branch is selected on this drop-down. Is anyone having problems with that? Just to give people a few seconds to like make sure they're caught up here, I'm going to talk briefly a little more about branches. So the idea behind a branch is that it is kind of like, you can think of the overall structure of Git as a tree, and that it like starts from a single root point, and it has commits that like connect in sequence to that point. And at any point in time, you can make a branch off of a specific commit that can go off in a different direction. You can make multiple branches from the same commit going in different directions. A branch is just a new sequence of commits that starts at a given place relative to the rest of your working tree. So the rest of the commits that you have, and that can then go do its own thing until at some point in the future, you decide to merge it back in with the rest of the code.
So then, real quick, so you hit branches and then search branches and you type in, is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
And then it says no branches found matching Grace Whipple blog post, but I don't see a button to say create.
Oh, interesting. Let's see. You're logged in, right?
Yes, I am.
Are you on the original one, or are you on your own fork?
I'm on my own fork. I think so, at least. Here, when I can go back to the main page and then I still can like hit my own fork. But for some reason, when I type like Grace Whipple blog post, it doesn't say I can create one. It just says not found.
Weird.
Mine
So
also
you
says
don't
I
see
can create
this. Wait, Acacia, yours says that too, did you say?
No. Mine says I can create it, so I don't know.
Okay.
Can you post the URL that you're at, Grace? Onto
Yeah,
the
of
Slack?
course.
Yeah.
Onto Slack?
Or on the Zoom chat is fine too.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll do that right now. Thank you. Okay, let me
Yeah, of course.
So, Emily, it looks like we have a question in the Slack that I will defer to you because you can give a better explanation than I can.
Yeah,
The difference
fantastic
between
question.
A branch and a fork. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is a subtle thing. So a fork is another copy of the repository. So a fork is kind of like having another directory on your computer where you cloned the repository from GitHub. It's just that instead of being on your computer, it's another copy that's on GitHub. So it's another copy of the repository that's like in the network of repositories that like start with the same commit and know about each other. Whereas a branch lives within a repository, and you can have a branch exist across forks. So possibly a helpful illustration of this concept is if I go back to the empirical, this was not the best way to get here. Okay. So if I go back to empirical, GitHub actually has a nice visualization that might help make this clearer. If I go to branches, I feel like this UI keeps changing. No, that is not what I was looking for. Settings, somewhere there's like a beautiful visualization of this. And I was really hoping, oh, insights, that's where it is. It's definitely under insights. Okay, so if I go to the network graph, I believe, I think this will make it clearer. Yeah, so this is a visualization of all of the forks and all of the branches of empirical. Okay, it's a little bit zoomed in time, in that it's like, that didn't help. It's only showing very recently, but we can also kind of go back and see what happened in the past. So you can see these are all different forks. So these are all copies of the main empirical repo that exists in other people's accounts. However, there are branches that exist across all of them. So for instance here, this, is it not gonna let me, darn it. Usually it would like have a nice little mouse over that would say what this commit was. But so you can see like, here's an instance where there was a commit on the main devosoft branch. I pulled it over to this branch on my fork and did some stuff with it. And oh, there we go. Now it's doing the mouse over thing. It's being a little inconsistent there. And contributed it into this branch. This is that branch that I made the pull request from. So pretty soon, this is going to like get a line that goes back to the main devosoft fork. And when that happens, I think what will happen is there will actually be a branch that has this same name in the main devosoft fork, or that's not, in the main devosoft repository. So there will be another branch with this merge branch. But then that branch within the fork, sorry, this is not a good description. Let me start over. So a branch is something that lives within a specific copy of a repository. You can sync branches across multiple copies of the repository. If, for instance, you want to share a feature you're working on with somebody else's copy of the repository. Just like how you can have a copy of the master branch from Empirical on your local copy of the repo. Does that help at all?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I don't usually get as far in Git as to explain branches and forks. It's a lot of fun to be able to actually talk about this, but I'm a lot less practiced at it than I am with this first part of Git. Okay, so in that time, has everyone had a chance to make the new branch in their fork of waves? Or are people still having trouble?
I'm helping Grace work out what's going on for hers.
Okay. In the interest of time, while you do that, I'm going to keep moving forward with everyone else, and I will be happy to circle back and help if there are more problems. Okay. So make sure that everybody is on the correct branch of their repository. And now let's go ahead and start making changes. So the way to do that is go into this blog/posts directory, since this is where we want to make the blog posts, and click on create new file. You could just as easily be doing this by having cloned this repository and manually making a new file with your text editor. I'm just going to keep it on GitHub because that is simpler for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to click create new file. It's going to ask me to name it. I'm gonna follow that naming convention that the other one had. So I'm gonna start with the year 2020. I'm just gonna use today's date. So that's gonna be 06/03. And then I'm going to give a capsule description of what this blog post is about. I'm just gonna call this example blog post. You should call yours something related to the project you're working on. And then I'm gonna end this with the .md extension. And that just tells any program that is looking at this that this is a markdown file. And that gives it reasonable expectations about what this file is going to contain. So I said that all of these should start with that header that we saw in Matthew's example. And so that has 3 dashes to open it and 3 dashes to close it. And let me just go open his blog post again as an example, because it's really easy to forget what's supposed to go in here. And I'm going to go to raw so that I can actually see the plain text content here. Okay, so it's got layout, title, date, and author. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. I guess I could have also just copied and pasted the dashes as well. So I'm going to leave layout as post. I'm going to turn the title into pull request. Oh, that is caps lock. Pull request example. You should call this whatever your project is about. I'm going to put in today's date. So again, that is 06/03. And instead of Matthew as the author, I'm going to put my name. And then I'm just going to write one sentence here, just in the interest of time. So this is an example blog post. And then to actually add this to the repository, basically that's going to be making a commit, which is why this dialog here says commit new file. And so this box here is the commit message. So start Emily's blog post. Forget if apostrophes are allowed in commit messages. They probably are, but I'm not going to put it there just in case. Notice that I'm talking about myself in the third person here. I'm doing that because when we later look at the list of all of the commits on the main Waves repo, if we all have ones that say start my blog post, it's going to be really confusing and uninformative. It'll be much more useful if they all say start like the name of the person making the blog post, blog post. Or you could even say blog post about whatever topic it's about. Totally up to you. Just keep in mind that, like, yeah, this is going to appear in a list of all changes that have been made to the repository, not just like your own personal changes. And so then it's going to give me an option of whether I want to commit directly to the Emily Dolson blog post branch or create a new branch. In this case, I already made this branch specifically to commit this file to. So yes, I want to commit this file to this branch. So I'm going to click the green button to commit it. And now I've made that file. So as a first pass, I want everyone to just make this header. You can go back and add content to the post after the session, but we're running a little low on time. I want to make sure we get to everything. So let's see. Could people attempt the show of hands thing again when you've got this done? It won't work for everybody, but at least it will give me some sense of like how fast everyone's going. Because I don't want to rush anyone, but I also don't want you to just be sitting around waiting.
Emily, how do you get to that screen?
This screen?
Yes.
Good question. So I think after I made my commit, it dumped me onto this screen, if I'm remembering correctly, which has a list of the 2 blog posts that are now in this directory. I clicked on the one I just made, and then it took me here.
Are you asking how to start your new blog post, though? Like how to create the file?
I found the screen, so that was my main question. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there more questions? Okay, yeah, looks like the hands are trickling in. Don't stress about like choosing a good title. You can always change it later. Right now, I just want to get the basic flow of the commits down, make sure it's working for everyone. Is anyone encountering any specific problems?
I messed mine up because I put it in the wrong place and then I deleted it, which I know makes it not appear, but it's still in the history because I did not change the history. I just
That is correct.
The second commit to delete it.
Yeah, that is a good thing to be aware of in general. On Git, because it's all about saving previous state, nothing is ever truly deleted. So if, for instance, you ever accidentally commit like a password or like credit card information or something else sensitive to Git, just deleting it will not fix your problem. You really just need to change the password. There are ways to change your Git repo, your Git history. And if you haven't pushed it to a publicly hosted repository on GitHub or something, then that can potentially save you. But as soon as you push it somewhere, there are like scrapers looking for that kind of thing. Sorry, Matthew, were you gonna say something?
Hey, you can sanitize certain, there's tools available to sanitize certain strings out of Git histories. So if you ever run into that issue, just let one of us know and we'll hook you up.
Yeah. Yeah, and just do not ever push it to something public in the meantime before you fix it. Okay, I'm seeing enough hands that now I'm not sure if we've just hit like everyone who can put up a hand has put up a hand and people without that option haven't, or if people are still working on this. Let's see, does anyone need more time? Is anyone encountering problems? Feel free to post in chat or on Slack if you are. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone having a problem, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. But if I shouldn't be moving on, if you need more time, definitely feel free to stop me. Okay, so we should now all have a commit on our fork that does not exist on the main repository for Waves, which is the one that is on Matthew's account. So if we want to contribute it back to Matthew's, the way to do that is to make a pull request. And we want you to see this because this is exactly how you're going to be contributing your code back to the empirical repo. I don't personally do native development, but I suspect it works a similar way. So does Vita. So if we want to do that, we can click on this pull requests tab on Matthew's copy of the Waves repo. And we can start a new pull request by clicking this green new pull request button. And so by default, it will want us to choose a branch that is inside Matthew's copy of the Git repo to make the pull request from. However, in this case, we don't want one inside Matthew's copy. We want one inside our own copy. And so the way to get that as an option is to click this compare across forks link. And so that will let you choose an option from the list of forks of this repository that GitHub knows about. So I'm going to choose my fork. You should choose yours. It will then let you choose a branch on your fork that you want to base the pull request off of. So that should be the one that you just created. In my case, I'm going to choose the one that I put my blog post on. So that's Emily Dolson blog post. You notice I also have one that I used to make this enrichment session. So this is the practice that we use in real life too. So I'm going to choose the blog post one. And so it's comparing the stuff that is in my blog post branch to the stuff that is in Matthew's master branch. and it's noticing that there are no merge conflicts. So there's no places where I changed a line in one way and Matthew changed it in a different way. So it can automatically figure out how to merge this back together. And so I can click on this green create pull request button to make the pull request. And so I'm going to give it an informative title. Notice it defaulted to my commit message, but I'm just going to say start an example blog post. You should all say like start a blog post on whatever topic you're working on. If this was a more complicated pull request, you might include some explanatory code or text here for like why this is important and necessary. In this case, this is really just an example. Your text is probably going to be pretty similar to the title of your pull request. Yeah, and so then you can click on create pull request. So it's going to just do a few checks. It's going to run the continuous integration. I'm not actually sure what the continuous integration is testing in this case since it's building a website. I assume it's testing to make sure that we haven't like horribly broken the markdown syntax.
The CI build is just always broken on this one. I haven't bothered fixing it.
Oh, okay, fair. That works
yeah,
too.
So it's going to fail.
Okay, it's going to fail, but that is not going to stop us from being able to merge this into the master branch.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and so it has the green check mark telling us it has no conflicts. And yeah, so at some point, Matthew will be able to come and look at all of these and merge them. So in the main empirical repository, we use labels to indicate when a branch is ready to, or when a pull request is ready to be merged. So those don't exist on this repo. So you'll have to just like leave a comment when you're actually ready for it to be merged. You should do that once you finish writing your blog post. Until then, there's not really a reason that it needs to go back into the master branch, unless we all decide that there is at some point.
I mean, if we want to add those labels are really trivial to add.
Actually, yeah, that's fair. I guess I can't because I don't own this, but Matthew could.
Oh, yeah, I can. I'll go add a label for like when people have a topic written down for when they have a draft written down.
Awesome.
For once they've incorporated peer review.
Oh, okay, great question from Anya. Why even start the pull request until it's ready to be merged? That is a good question, and there are different philosophies on whether or not you should do this. At the beginning of Empirical, we discussed what we wanted our norm to be, and we decided that our norm should be start making a pull request as soon as you start working on a new feature, because that way we can all see what features everybody is working on, and we don't accidentally have two people trying to do the same thing because they didn't know about each other. As a project gets larger, stuff like that is more and more of an issue. And that is why labels are important, because the downside of that is that somebody could look at it and think, oh, this is ready to be merged, when in reality it's not. You're still working on developing the feature. So if you look at the pull requests in Empirical, you'll notice that they've all got these merge not ready, or some of the merged ones will have merge ready labels. And that indicates whether or not people should be thinking about whether or not to merge these yet. Was a good question. Are there more?
There's another question that asks that when we push on our fork, will this pull request be automatically updated?
Great question. Yes, so anything that you add to this branch that you're basing the pull request off of will go into the pull request. And that's part of why this is a nice way to keep track of it. Because the other good thing that it does is like show you all of the files that you changed and how you changed them. So it's a nice interface for kind of making sure that you're not accidentally adding extraneous changes that you don't mean to incorporate into your pull request. Great question. More? Oh, and it looks like Matthew has added the labels because I see that Sarah has them on hers. So if I go into mine, I should now have the option to add labels. Okay, maybe I don't.
Wait, maybe I need to change a different setting. I'll try that.
question.
Mhm.
If you like go in and add things to your blog post and you commit them, I guess is what you would do in this scenario. Are they included in the pull request? Like, does it update it for you? Like
if you do that on your fork?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's just go. I will demo that out. So the key thing here is it depends on what branch you're on. But assuming you do this on the branch that the pull request is based off of, then yes. So for instance, if I go to mine and I'm on my blog post branch and I click this little edit button to edit this file, and I say, here is another line. And I'm going to have a super boring commit message. I've added another line. I'm going to commit those changes. If I now go back to my pull request, you can see that that additional commit automatically showed up.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. More questions? Okay, so I am seeing a healthy number of pull requests here. Looks like most of you are successfully making them. Yeah, these are all looking great. Is anyone encountering problems? Okay, does anyone have questions about that? That pretty much wraps up the practical portion of today's enrichment. There's a little discussion stuff I want to do, although we don't have a ton of time. No more questions? Obviously, if more questions crop up later, you're always welcome to ask. There's also a list of additional potentially helpful resources at the bottom of the page on the website for today's enrichment session. Okay, but if there aren't any more questions that people immediately have, let's quickly move on to the discussion section and see if we can fit a bit of that in there. So I'm gonna go to the website for today's session. Let's see, what's the best way to get there? Okay, and so you'll notice also there's a nice summary of everything that we talked about here in case you need to go back to it as a reference. It talks about making pull requests and stuff. So the one thing that we haven't had much chance to talk about, and I don't think we're going to have a chance to talk about this in depth, is just the philosophy behind open source web development and licenses. So just in brief, Empirical is an open source repository. At a minimum, what that means is that all of the code in it is freely available. The specifics of what you're allowed to do with it are dictated by the license. So pretty much anytime you're posting code publicly on GitHub or somewhere else, you should include a license with your code. Sometimes people think, oh, this is just a simple thing. I don't want to add the complication of a license. But really, a license is just a really clear way of communicating to other people what they are and are not allowed to do with your code. And so there are a lot of things that you want to think about in choosing a license. I've kind of outlined a few of them here. The website Choose a License is also just like a great go-to resource for that. But in general, you want to think about whether it's important to you that other people attribute your code to you, so like they give you credit for having written it, whether you care whether or not people can use your code commercially, so whether they can profit off of it, whether you care if people modify your code. Usually there's not much reason to care if people modify your code, but like if you're worried about them modifying it so that it like does something bad or so that it like doesn't work as well, there might be instances where that would be an issue. And then there's also this topic of infective licenses. copy left. The GPL is the main instance of this, where any code licensed on that with that license can be reused, but only if the code that builds on it uses the same license. That's like a really fascinating. Sorry, yeah.
So I was going to say, if you refer to it as infective to anyone who really likes the GPL, they will be not happy with that particular framing. just to put that out there.
I don't know. I've like read people using infective like as a positive descriptor of the GPL. Might vary by person or over time. I mean, so I really like the idea behind the GPL. I don't personally use it because a lot of like people are scared to use code that's under the GPL because they are under different circumstances that force them to like not use the GPL, and so they can't build on code that is under it. And I want my code to be useful to as many people as possible. So you'll notice that pretty much all the code that comes out of the Diva Lab, including empirical, is under the MIT license. That is what we've all kind of decided on as a nice default, in that it requires attribution, which is important for everyone's like scientific career advancement. Yeah.
So I will comment that by far something like, I don't know, 99% of the downloads from the software we've made in the Diva Lab have been under the GPL. Only about 1% have been under MIT. It's just our recent licenses. So Avita and Avita Ed are GPL.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Cool. And that makes sense for something like Avita, because for Avita, you don't really expect people to build on it in the same way that like you would with empirical, because empirical is a library, whereas Avita is kind of more like an end product. I can totally get behind GPL as well. I mean, for the record.
So it's also the case that MIT license, I don't think existed, or it certainly wasn't popular yet when I first created Avita. And then once something is under the GPL, you can't get it out from under the GPL, right? And if I were the only one who ever had written code, or I knew everyone who had contributed code, then I could change it out from the GPL. But because other people had made contributions and I accepted them and whatnot, suddenly once it's under the GPL, you're locked in. So
yeah.
I think it's is Jory still here? Mabe is under a strange license, isn't it, Jory? If you are.
I think Jory might not actually be here.
Yeah, I know
Slack for a while, but yeah, I don't think Mabe is under one of these licenses.
Right, Mabe had a complicated licensing situation, right?
Yeah. So to explain some of what goes on with all of this. So the two most popular ones, as Emily was saying, there's the GPL and the MIT. GPL says any code you base off of this has to also be released for free under the GPL, and so hence the infectious. MIT says, here's my code, do whatever you want with it, just make sure that you say that I'm the one who wrote it. But you wanna write your own software that you sell or whatever, great, do whatever you want. High level, that's the distinction. The problem with this is many universities think, hey, you know what? We can get patents on this stuff. We can make companies pay to use our software. We want to get some money out of this. And if we release it under the MIT license or the GPL, we won't be able to get any money out of it. And so Aaron Tinsey, who used to be a faculty member at MSU and was the person who initially led the Mabe project, had some interest from various companies, and so he wanted to create a license that would make it so that companies had to pay if they wanted to use the software for profit. And that's where some of the complication came in. And so MSU's lawyers tried to come up with their own license, but one of the big reasons to use an existing license is that people have heard of them and know what to expect from them. When you have your own license, suddenly there's a ton of legalese, and even if it's totally reasonable legalese, people are going to be afraid of it and not want to use your code. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. That is important history. And that brings up another point. So we're basically at time, so I want to wrap up soon. But just to put it in your minds, in general, as you go forward in your software development careers, it's good to keep an eye on the licenses that you're contributing to software projects under. And like make sure that you're comfortable with them. So like, hopefully all of you are comfortable with the MIT license for empirical and with the license that MABE is under, because we can't easily change them at this point.
Well, so one caveat on that, we can change the MABE license because it's an MSU license, right? And so we do have a lot of flexibility there. And I've actually been very clear that I won't contribute to MABE under the license as it was because of certain restrictions on it. MABE 2 is being developed under MIT license.
Cool.
It's also important to note that I believe like you as individuals do not have to pay in any way, or you're not breaking the license by working on MABE.
Right, yeah, I mean, the MABE license isn't, it's still pretty permissive. It just is complicated because it's not a license that people have heard of, right?
Yes, so the key thing about the MABE license that people don't like is anything that is any changes made to MABE have to be contributed back to the main MABE library. You have to So people working on the main MABE library have no issue with this, right? But anyone's allowed to use it for free as long as you contribute back all the code you write. That's really the key thing. And it puts a big issue. So part of the challenge is if I go and download MABE and I just play with it a little bit to try some stuff out, but I write a little bit of code just because I'm trying to understand how it works, do I have to contribute that code back? And the way the license is written, it sounds like you do. And so that's, you know, for MABE 1, that's the weirdness, but we're moving away from that, and I think that'll be fine.
Yeah, so that's just a consideration that like you should be aware of as people who write code. That you want to make sure that your ideals are aligned with the licenses of code that you're contributing to in general. I am happy to talk more about licenses at any point in time, but our time for this enrichment session is up. I don't want to like make it run long. I guess everyone should feel free to go. If people have questions about licenses or want to talk about them or about any of this, feel free to stay. Does that seem reasonable? And if no one has questions, then we can just go.
So I know that one person wanted to stay and go through the last bit of the tutorial again. If anybody else wants to do some catch-up things, you can stay as well. Otherwise,
cool. And yeah, always feel free to reach out if you have questions. I am on Slack, and most other mentors also know basically as much about Git as I do.
Thank you, Emily.
So, by the way, historically, I found that line from Emily incorrect in that every time I get stuck on things, Emily seems to be able to solve the problems for me. So I in no way believe that I know anywhere close to what she knows about Git, but sure.
Well, thank you.
I was shocked to find out that Emily is an Emacs user. Really thought I knew you better than that, but
You didn't think she made that good of a choice usually? Because yeah, Emacs really is an amazing editor.
I mean, in reality, I use VS Code all the time. It's just if I'm in a terminal and I want to open a text editor, I don't want to open all of VS Code.
yeah, I don't even know anything about Emacs, to be honest. I don't have like an actual stake in this at all.
I have experienced Emacs, Vim insult discussions between those that are quite adamant about their editor. I know a tiny bit of Vim and a tiny bit of Emacs because Matt used Vim and Wesley uses Emacs, and it depends on who's helping me. And I think Tim used Emacs, so I learned a little tiny bit of each.
Yeah, okay, so Grace, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
so a quick question: is it okay if I back out now because I'm recording?
Yeah.
Do you want the rest of this recorded?
No, you're good.
I could leave this open in a corner. I don't care, but or.
You're totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
So, for like blog post, create new